introduce that at the beginning?
Absolutely.
Okay, you can ask me about that for sure, and I'll give a little anecdote.
All right. Since we are live here, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of Revel Revelry. Thank you all for taking the time to come join us this evening. I know we were off 2 weeks ago. A bunch of us were on different trips, but we're pleased to be back here tonight to talk about an often overlooked subject, and that's the winter encampment that George Washington has in Middlebrook, New Jersey. And we're going to be joined tonight by our friend and guest here, Paul Soltis, who's one of the interpretive rangers up there with the State Historic or the State Park Service up there. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to Paul just to introduce himself and give you a little background on him. And how he got to the Park Service. But one of the best stories, I got an email from Paul a few months ago about how he heard about emerging Revolutionary War, and I thought that's a great story. So if you could tell that story too.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, thanks very much. It's my first time speaking with you all, but having watched and seen all your earlier revelries, I feel like I've gotten to know all of you already. But yeah, my name is Paul. I'm from New Jersey. I live and grew up in Lawrence Township, which in the 18th century was Maidenhead, and of course, right at the center of that 10 Crucial Days campaign between Trenton and Princeton. I was just going out on a walk one evening down to the creek nearby my home, where one of those delaying tactics skirmishes took place on. Is that January the 1st or the 2nd? The 2nd. All right, I'm going to be in trouble at Princeton. But yes, January the 2nd, and then the lead up, of course, then Princeton is the 3rd. And I see a gentleman pull over from the side. There's a few small little blue signs there, actually, but if no one knew it was there, you wouldn't know it. And a gentleman pull over, and being me, I said, well, I gotta ask, how did you find this place? Why are you here? And he referred to me, Mark's book, was what he was following. And so I said, well, I want to let you know that, it is getting out there, and people are reading it and exploring on their own, even these places that aren't necessarily major, operation museum attractions, but still where there's historic sites preserved. I studied at the College of William and Mary. And my little quip is that, yes, I did the reverse of James Madison, who was unsatisfied with the stodgy established church at William and Mary. And although a Virginia gentry went up to New Jersey, and I did the reverse a few hundred years later. At William and Mary, I studied in a major in English and in the certificate program with the National Institute of American History and Democracy, which is basically a minor in colonial Williamsburg, but a lot of great field trip classes and approaches to public history through that program. And I had good fortune while I was still actually a student during my summers at William and Mary. I started working as a seasonal employee for our State Park Service here in New Jersey at Rockingham State Historic Site, which is Washington's final wartime headquarters outside Princeton roughly the fall of 1783. While Congress is meeting in Princeton, Washington is summoned to join them and stays at this house outside town. And it's while he's there that the Treaty of Paris is formally agreed. And then the news reaches America as well that the Treaty of Paris the definitive treaty has been formally agreed. And Washington composes his farewell orders to the armies of the United States. And then after various other kind of interludes, I guess already about over 3 years ago, I was able to take this position as the State Park Service's historian for Wallace House and Old Dutch Parsonage. Mark is standing in the cold, Christmas in July, as I called it, at the Wallace House right now in Somerville. And then just sort of adjacent to it, as well as another historic home, the Old Dutch Parsonage. The Old Dutch Parsonage stands from 1751. The Wallace House built really in the opening years of the Revolutionary War, and the State Park Service, with support from our Wallace House and Old Dutch Parsonage Association, looks after those today. And as one last little royal thing, what we just observed was our Jubilee. The Wallace House began as a historic house museum in 1897. And you can't make this up. The newspaper had on one side Wallace House dedicated, and on the other side, Dutch Reformed Church preaches on Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And so that's what we use as our inspiration for our 125th anniversary in June. We had the anniversary of the house's museum and of course, Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee. So a little step up there. So yes, from William and Mary, I'm a little bit of an unlikely Revolutionary War royalist historian, but yeah, I think the interplay is fascinating.
Yes. No, I have to say, yeah, Princeton's the William and Mary of the North. So there you go. But
yes.
Well, we're in good company because
very good. Yes, of course.
Too, George Washington got his surveyor's license.
Of course.
Mary, so the closest thing to an alma mater.
Yes. And I did mention, though, I am not the most famous Lawrence Township alumnus of William and Mary. Mr. John Stewart has me beat there in that category.
And now for the revelry, I'm told you have a special drink tonight here.
And as I am safely off the property of our state parks, I have brought along my revelry drink, which is an ironbound hard cider. A farm and cidery up in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, which is reviving the historic heritage breeds of the apple trees, which at least supposedly George Washington claimed were his very favorite. But what is definitely true behind it is that New Jersey was a center of apple orchards, and as a result, apple cider, especially in the 18th century, in the American Revolution. And although General Washington was a very proud Virginian, he conceded New Jersey had the best cider. So that was not a compliment given lightly. So to make it really New Jersey, I've got their Devil's Harvest, which kind of brings some cranberries and taste of the Pine Barrens into it. So that's
that's fantastic.
My Jersey drink for today.
Yeah, I know after Washington crossed the Delaware, one of the anecdotes is when they get to Birmingham and he splits his army in two, he has a cider along the way.
Sure.
In there, so that's great. So
thank you.
Well, yeah, no. So in talking about the 10 crucial days, actually, is the perfect way into this, because I think Washington usually, and my book included, you talk about the Battle of Princeton after the victories at Princeton. Washington heads off, goes to Morristown. And that's kind of where the story stops. Of course, that's not the end of anything. Things are just ready in New Jersey. And although they originally go to Morristown, later it's really that spring and summer, right? They start heading down, and it's the first time that Washington's army is going to end up at Middlebrook.
That's right. Sure. And so, just to introduce what is, this term we use, Middlebrook, even to local people in Somerset County, New Jersey, is kind of an unknown term. There is a waterway called the Middlebrook that flows into the Raritan River. And there was at one time a village of Middlebrook that was sort of a twin village with the village of Boundbrook. And since that time, they have grown together into a single borough of Boundbrook. Still a pretty small town, but even smaller village at that time. But although there's one settlement and one waterway, that was also a term used to refer to this larger kind of central Somerset County, New Jersey area. And yes, although I use the term the Middlebrook cantonment to really refer to the winter of 78 to 79, which is our main focus at the Wallace House, as that is the winter when Washington was headquartered here. Really, Middlebrook enters the Revolutionary War either through the first Middlebrook or Little Middlebrook, right? That winter and spring immediately following the 10 Crucial Days campaign. So following the 10 Crucial Days, Washington sort of assesses whether or not to proceed with the attack, I guess, really into New Brunswick, or to kind of, take the win and head up, and he decides to take the win. And he passes through probably at least the region of what is today called Somerville. It was not yet a town where the Wallace House sits. It was just the open country there. In fact, there was no town of Somerville because the Somerset County Courthouse was still to the south in what's today called Millstone. And it would take that Colonel Simcoe to burn the Somerset County Courthouse. And it was later relocated in the area that eventually the town of Somerville grew around. So even Somerville is caused by the Revolution, but it's not really a town yet. It's just the larger Middlebrook region. But yeah, so in January of 77, following the Battle of Princeton, Washington with his army will march through this region. There are a few stones, interestingly, in the town of Somerville today that may or may not mark exactly the route, but are interesting in that they speak to this larger event. And then really it'll be the spring, early June, when Washington then returns, at least himself, to this region from Morristown. And this is the period, variously called either the first Middlebrook camp or the Little Middlebrook camp. And this New Jersey State Park Service actually does include a Washington Rock State Park, which is a promontory sort of overlook that from which one can see from the Watchung Mountains out to New York City, out to Staten Island, and really out to New York Harbor. And this is in the region where Washington would have an outdoor headquarters during that early summer period, as they're kind of assessing what the year 1777 will hold. So that's the first Middlebrook.
Yeah, and I think one of the most famous things I've heard about that is, it's during that summer of 1777 when the Betsy Ross flag is adopted, and so that's where they first raised the Betsy Ross flag, the American flag.
Yes. So we would use the Francis Hopkinson flag is the one we identify, and not just because he's a New Jerseyman too, but so it'll be, there is a privately run kind of park run by a group called the Washington Campground Association, which preserves another little patch that was part of the camp during that May to June period, and it was basically where Washington was, if you will, when Congress adopted the Flag Day resolution that, years later would become the basis of Flag Day on June the 14th, 1777. And it is, we believe, where then that Francis Hopkinson designed flag was first flown in an official capacity with the Army. And they do have special permission to fly the Francis Hopkinson flag, I think by an act of Congress, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year. And they have a very long running reading of the Declaration of Independence on that site too, beneath the flagpole on the 4th of July proper every year. So that's the Washington Campground Association, and a part of the larger Watchung Mountains region, or the Blue Hills, as they're sometimes called in the 18th century.
And what's the difference between the Hopkinson flag and the Betsy Ross flag? Is it like the star alignment or something? Or
the Hopkinson flag would be the sort of grid arrangement, whereas Betsy Ross flag, I say, usually refers to the kind of the circle arrangement. And
interesting.
So.
And how far is Washington Rock from Somerville, I guess?
Just a few miles.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about 15 minutes driving. Probably maybe about 10 miles off the top of my head. But it's the town there is called Greenbrook, but basically it's on the top, and it's today run with the Somerset County Park Commission. So it's sort of attached to a much larger Washington Valley, appropriately called a kind of preserved woodland. So it makes for a neat spot that is both a really interesting, beautiful view, kind of just a great scenic pullover for anyone. But then also, when you really start to dive into the Revolutionary War history that it contains, also becomes a really great spot.
What about when Washington is there in 77? Is he staying at the Wallace House, or is he?
He's not. Yeah, and that's a good point. Yes. So what we really directly interpret at Wallace House is Washington's headquarters the winter of 78 to 79, and this will be, of course, the winter after. We're kind of squeezed in between those two winters. The earlier winter at Valley Forge, and then the following winter is Jockey Hollow at Morristown. This is the Middlebrook cantonment in between those two. And this one is planned much more deliberately, much more in advance. There is no Christmas night crossing that throws off that winter. And so this will be basically around the fall of 1778. They choose the region of the Middlebrook as the winter camp. And there's all kinds of discussions and reasons to why. the one I hear most often is, well, okay, it's close enough to New York to monitor the British, who have now consolidated there following the Battle of Monmouth and all that summer campaign, but is also far enough away with the mountains as a defense that it can be, retreat or defenses there if necessary. What I never liked about that, though, is we use the same exact reason for Morristown the following winter. Well, they're there because it's close to New York, but far enough in the mountains. So what's the difference here? And actually, one of the most recent kind of new, it's an understudied, for sure, part of the American Revolutionary War. Really, the most recent and until recently kind of serious study was a dissertation circa kind of 1950s, which is really great that we have at least that, but was kind of something that's sorely needing update and further research. And I think what's exciting is now that new research is beginning. And one of them is, I think he's on faculty now at Rutgers Newark, but a historian called Dr. Stephen Elliott, who just recently did a book on all the winter camps, but it includes a chapter on Middlebrook that, at least to me, gave me really good new insights and included, for the first time at least that I had seen it, not maybe others had seen it before me, but Nathaniel Green's considerations of supply lines is part of that winter camp as well. Roughly, and I know you have experts on Valley Forge on your team, so I could get in trouble, but roughly my understanding, Valley Forge was a good military strategic point because it was off all the roads, so it was safe. However, it was poor logistically because it was off all the roads, so you couldn't get supplies there. And so very intentionally selecting this Middlebrook region as opposed to like the Hudson Valley Islands or somewhere around there, they were close to Trenton, which was a major supply depot for the Continental Army. And so it basically provided that additional benefit. So that's kind of one of the reasons then why Middlebrook. And then the following summer, the military situation changes where Somerset County is now more exposed to the British. And so a relocation for the next winter up at Jockey Hollow, Morristown, makes sense by that. So that's a very rough idea, and relying on the scholarship of others, I want to make sure I'm fully crediting. But what is exciting is we are kind of doing new research and new scholarship, broadly speaking, right now, that I think will only kind of increase as we get towards those big anniversaries. 2026, of course, for New Jersey's first constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but then also 28 to 29 for the Middlebrook camps and Washington's headquarters here.
Yeah, no, I gotta say, yeah, I think Middlebrook's got to be the most underrepresented of all the different.
Yeah, I'll say, and one of the kind of names for it is the forgotten cantonment. I don't quite like that, just because I say, well, then why do you remember it? But I like the successful cantonment. But yeah, one of the reasons, and this also, I think many others have kind of observed, but including my predecessor, who was the longtime historian of record and curator at the Wallace House and Old Dutch Parsonage, Jim Kurtzenberger. A lot of the materials I received from him, you others have said, one of the reasons understudied is perhaps the lack of drama, the lack of major hardship and suffering. So whereas at Valley Forge, you of course have the major supply shortages, the major issues with illness, then the disciplinary turnaround with von Steuben, or whereas at Morristown you have the major winter weather, the worst winter of probably, if not the Revolutionary War, perhaps of all the 18th century in British North America or the future United States. So and Middlebrook then as a result kind of being relatively successful because of both. They correct what they can correct. They correct a lot of the sort of human errors at Valley Forge, and they also avoid, by the accident of nature, the severe hardships that will come the following winter at Jockey Hollow. It is a relatively mild winter. There are a few records of kind of traces of snow, but nothing like what the winter following would present. So sort of on those both fronts, they have a relatively peaceful winter. And then the explanation being, well, perhaps historians most often tend to those moments of drama and chaos, right? Where the drama occurs, and Middlebrook being a relatively successful winter camp got less attention. Whatever that's worth, to say, hey, and let's see what we can do from here to learn and study it. On the other level, in terms of a preservation point of view, which you're already kind of seeing is in an interesting way, the scholarship and the preservation kind of go hand in hand. Although I don't want to say it's not preserved, because I think that dismisses a lot of really great historic resources that do survive. but there is not a single, as there is, of course, at the National Historical Park for Valley Forge or for Morristown. We have all these sort of little pockets that coexist and live right. Even you can see the picture behind you. That's not even 20th or later 20th century spread. Those are colonial revival sort of 1910s houses that border the old Wallace House. But it sits right now in a private residential neighborhood, which is different, but I think it's kind of cool. It kind of adds a new perspective. And as I say, it is New Jersey is notorious for home rule. New Jersey is the home rule state where we have 565 municipalities and even more school districts for every little town and village and borough. And in a way, that's reflected in the heritage landscape too. So instead of one big national park, what we have are 5 surviving historic houses. We informally call ourselves the 5 generals' houses. These homes were all used by generals as their headquarters. The Wallace House is the only one that belongs to the state of New Jersey. The other 4 are all either in local municipalities or county government and run by private historical organizations separately. And then we also have those kind of landscape areas like Washington Rock State Park or a few others that are historic features in the grounds, basically that preserve and tell the story. So yes, one can look at it and be disappointed, but I prefer to kind of look and see, well, this is kind of an interesting where the surviving landscape actually kind of teaches us a little bit about how it all came to be and why is this place so distinct from some of those other kind of stories. The preservation history is fascinating in its own right there.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. What are
and then the chicken and egg is, well, did they not preserve it all intact because there wasn't scholarship, or has there not been scholarship because there's no big national park, but so, well, but it makes it uniquely New Jersey, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. What are the other 4?
Sure, of course. Yes. So when I talk about our 5 generals, or our Middlebrook consortium, they include the Wallace House, of course, is Washington's headquarters, the commander-in-chief's headquarters. Then going down the larger township is Bridgewater Township, and that includes the Van Vechten House, a Dutch American historic home, which was headquarters to General Nathaniel Greene. It is there that General Greene has what is called a little frisk in his own writings. He talks about General Washington coming to visit for a dance in March of '79. And General Washington will dance near on 3 hours without once setting down with Mrs. Greene, Kitty Greene, who's 25 years old. This is General Greene writing about it. I don't think there's anything untoward going on, but it shows you that you get, you all as Revolutionary War historians know, not the Washington of the presidential years, but the vigorous and active Washington of the Revolutionary War. Today, that is the headquarters of the Somerset County Historical Society. So they interpret the Revolutionary War history, and they also use it as their house, their library and archives for the whole history of Somerset County. If we follow down the road, we reach the Van Horn House, which overlooks what is now TD Bank Ballpark, interestingly, home of a minor league baseball team, which is currently affiliated with the New York Yankees and the Somerset Patriots, appropriately. And the Van Horn House was Lord Stirling's headquarters. The interesting connection there being that Lord Stirling will basically deputize for Washington when he leaves camp for an interlude in Philadelphia in December to January of 78-9. Lord Stirling had his own home kind of nearby, Basking Ridge. So that's another interesting question to me. I don't know why it was felt necessary for him to accommodate himself in a rented headquarters, but maybe that 10 miles even was a difference. But so he's kind of the localest, at least, of these 5 generals. And then following the Raritan River, we then reach Bound Brook, and now on the south side, what is called South Bound Brook. And there you'll find the Abraham Stotts House, which was headquarters for Baron von Steuben. The Friends of the Abraham Stotts House interpret that as a full historic house museum and do a really neat job there, and also organize a reenacting event of a campaign from that first Middlebrook from April of '77, the Battle of Bound Brook, which they organized kind of a neat encampment and reenactment in April. And then that's the Middlebrook cantonment proper. The satellite of the Middlebrook cantonment was the Pluckeman cantonment in Bedminster Township, and that was the headquarters for the artillery. It was also there that the artillery for the first time set up an academy which we claim as the first military academy of the United States Army, the forerunner in that sense, as a full kind of training area. The academy was the host in February of '79 to a ball to celebrate the first anniversary of the French alliance. So of course the alliance was made while they were at Valley Forge, but that news took a while to reach the United States that an alliance had been made. So more close to the date, they had a 1-year anniversary of the alliance. And that, of course, featured these kind of 18th century fireworks and illuminations, and Washington attended. So that was up at the Pluckman cantonment. The site of the cantonment itself is pretty much developed over, although there are some preserved archaeological sites of interest. And that story is really told by the Jacobus Vanderveer House and Museum, which was Knox's headquarters up in Bedminster Township. And so that kind of network of 5 homes, 4 along the main Middlebrook corridor, and then 1 up to the north in Bedminster Township, all kind of preserve and interpret as well the combined aspects of that Middlebrook cantonment as a whole.
Yeah, that's those homes still exist. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, but it's cool. But but what is nice is although they're all 5 organizations, obviously the history complements, and also the work today complements, and so we work together. And I'm hoping especially to do even more perhaps as we approach those big anniversary events. But
do y'all do tours of like all 5 or something like that?
There is appropriately on President's Day weekend, the Sunday preceding President's Day, is the 5 Generals Tour, which the Heritage Trail Association runs and does a kind of neat bus tour. It's at a pretty fast clip. You got to get through 5 houses, but they do a great job coordinating that. And hopefully the next step is to then figure out, okay, how do we either scale that event up or bring in other opportunities for people to explore on their own as well, and kind of make these connections among these 5 historic homes. So yes, it's there, and like everyone, we're working together to see, well, okay, what's the next, how can we make that even more? But at least at present, and for a long time running, the Heritage Trail Association have taken the lead on coordinating that annual bus tour.
That's 5 homes. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great to see. Yeah, even though they're different entities.
Yeah.
I know it takes a lot to work together among different sites. So that's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your site.
Okay, sure.
So you got the Wallace House and the Parsonage, and they were
right
during the cantonment. So
yeah, sure. So the Wallace House itself is really built in the opening years of the Revolutionary War. We believe it is the largest home built during wartime in New Jersey, not standing, but built during the war, because not a lot of people are building at all, let alone on such a large scale. And the interesting element of it is, why is there a home built here? John Wallace was a merchant, a Scottish immigrant who first arrived in Newport and then really established himself in Philadelphia. Married into the Maddox family of Philadelphia, Mary Maddox, and became Mrs. Wallace. And in the opening years of the Revolutionary War, he more or less wanted to avoid the conflict. He's not, at least as far as we can tell, not quite an outright loyalist, but although many of his peers were, as Scottish merchants in the city of Philadelphia, they were doing quite well with the British trading network. There was no reason to mess it up. He doesn't seem to have been quite active as a loyalist, but obviously certainly not a supporter of war or independence either, at least at the outset. Kind of just was part of that third of the disaffected who wanted nothing to do with the whole thing. He bought this land, about 95 acres in Somerset County, New Jersey. He called it Hope Farm, perhaps hoping to escape the war. And of course, moving to the middle of New Jersey to escape the Revolutionary War was not a prescient move on Mr. Wallace's part. But when he moves here with his wife and his mother-in-law, Mary Maddox, and they do bring with them as well servants in slavery, whom they had held in slavery in Philadelphia. We know the names of at least 2 of them, a woman named Phyllis and a young man named Greg. The even exact numbers are not recorded, but important to remember, of course, as we think of the uncertainty of war for all people, only that much more exacerbated for those who have no choice, no free choice in the direction that they'll be made to take, what family or friends in Philadelphia they left behind, and the uncertainty of when or if they'll ever be able to return. So it's, it speaks, of course, that a hugely uncertain moment as this Revolutionary War begins. And basically, it is a new house, and a nice big house right in the area of this Middlebrook region that Washington chooses for his winter camp. And so the quartermaster's department begins the procurement process, and as the top house, selected for the top general. There are negotiations that take place. It's not a quartering where they knock on the door and take over. They do negotiate with Mr. Wallace. And so again, he's obviously not outright loyalist, and that he works with them. He's not offering his house either, though. However, it's like an act of patriotic endeavor. But he comes to an agreement by which they will rent the house for $1,000 for the winter camp, and the family and Washington's military family will share the house. And so this will become one of those kind of shared headquarters. Washington also constructs a temporary kitchen and dining room on the back of the house, which is another area that I'm still learning a lot about. But it's kind of exciting because apparently there were similar constructions added to the Potts House at Valley Forge the winter earlier, and the Ford Mansion, of course, at Morristown the winter after. So this kind of became a custom of Washington's to do. Even though it's a large house, it's still not large enough to accommodate the whole range of activity here. Washington himself is here for 2 weeks, initially in December of '78. He'll then leave the camp for an interlude in Philadelphia for meetings with Congress and his all-important reunion for the winter with Martha Washington. And then they'll arrive here together on February the 5th, and they'll be in residence together from February the 5th until June the 3rd of 1779. And as with most of these winter camps, it's really a winter-spring camp. But that's kind of the duration of Washington's headquarters here. One of the trustees of the Crossroads of the American Revolution Association, I thought, I'm no good with numbers, but he did the math. And between the Ford Mansion, the Wallace House, the Ford Mansion at Morristown National Historical Park, the Wallace House here in Somerville, New Jersey, and then Rockingham, the state historic site outside Princeton in Kingston, New Jersey today, Washington spends 1 out of every 5 nights of the Revolutionary War. Now, that's not even just his nights in New Jersey. That's his nights at these 3 homes in New Jersey. So that's kind of an interesting way to really think about the duration, if you will, at least, if anything, of his time in this area.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. I'd love to, calculate some of that math to figure out where, because
Yes.
I'm coming to you all from Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay. Yeah.
Mount Vernon is here, and trying to calculate time he actually spends at Mount Vernon versus.
Oh, sure. Especially during the Revolutionary War. Yeah.
War, during the presidency, during the French Indian. I mean, like, you calculate the amount of time he's out doing stuff, and you're right, he's traveling constantly throughout the war, but the fact that he spends as much time as he does in just these few houses.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we talk about New Jersey as the crossroads of the American Revolution, rightly so, but even you can just narrow it down to these 3, and you still got a pretty impressive record, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, and was Wallace? You said was he still living in the house while they were?
He was, yes. So this will be one of the arrangements where they agree to share the house.
Was there? I mean, there must have been fear of spying or espionage or anything.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I really need to learn more about. And when I get like a lot of time, right? Because obviously, as I said, this man is. He's not knocking on the door saying, please, I'd love to offer my home to you, General Washington. But also, obviously, they were comfortable living with him.
Yeah.
There's not some kind of fear that, this is some kind of covert Scots agent who's going to be reporting back. No, so at least as far as I'm aware at this moment, and I'm always fascinated to learn more, but I don't think there's any necessary fear of the Wallaces themselves. Primarily John and Mary Wallace and his mother-in-law, her mother, Mary Maddox. He is certainly concerned about spycraft and espionage during this winter, but much more to do so with what's kind of going on, of course, in New York proper, but really Washington is concerned about that kind of area around Staten Island and Elizabethtown. Today it's just called Elizabeth, New Jersey. There's some great writing when they're getting ready for that. I mentioned the anniversary of the French alliance. They're going to have that big ball up in Bedminster. And Washington is writing to his officers in that region, near Staten Island, hey, this is going to be a big party. Inevitably, this is not a secret. So keep an eye out. This is, we want to make sure that this is not used as some kind of opportunity to just kind of strike at the main camp while all the top generals are out, that are kind of a few miles away. So certainly, yeah, there's concern around there. But this, as far as I can tell at this moment in my much more to be explored for sure studies, there's not necessarily fear that the Wallaces themselves are anything to worry about. Interestingly, you did mention, of course, the Old Dutch Parsonage is the joint historic home that we look after at this property, kind of by accident. They both have their own preservation histories. Whereas the Wallace House was preserved in 1897, has for its significance as Washington's headquarters. The Old Dutch Parsonage was built in 1751 and was going to be demolished in 1912 to make way for the raised right-of-way for the Central Jersey Railroad. And it was moved in 1913, about 500 yards, as an effort to save it. Both homes were really preserved in separate efforts, and then in 1947 were donated together to the state of New Jersey, from which time they've been solidly preserved and interpreted together. So they have their distinct histories. However, like any neighbors in the 18th century, when you start to dig, you then see how intertwined they are. And the Reverend Jacob Ritson Hardenberg, who I would say is most noted for his role as the principal founder and then first president of Queens College, what becomes Rutgers University, with William and Mary, the only of the colonial colleges that eschews the Ivy League and becomes a state university in its respective host. But he is an active member of so unlike Wallace, who's kind of indifferent to the whole thing, he's very much pro-revolutionary. And his stepson, the son of the first minister to live here, and he married the minister's wife again, and so he becomes the stepson. That's another revelry story, I guess. But Frederick Frelinghuysen, both of them. So the House basically produces 2 delegates to the Provincial Congress of New Jersey. So before John Witherspoon, as president of Princeton, can sign the Declaration of Independence, he needs instructions from the president of Rutgers, who's meeting in Burlington with the Provincial Congress of New Jersey. And so they effectively declare New Jersey an independent state of Great Britain. And then Hardenberg remains a wartime politician, whereas Frederick Frelinghuysen enters the New Jersey militia during the Revolutionary War. I say all that, that's my roundabout way to getting to what you were asking about the relationship then. Well, we know that in like 1782, around that period when Washington is up in the Hudson River Valley, somewhere up in New York State, Martha Washington is traveling to camp, as she does. And on one occasion, she sends a note ahead asking if she can stay at the Hardenbergs' New York home, stop in for breakfast on her way up. So yes, this is a nice visit, and she gets a free breakfast, I'm sure, out of the deal. But of all the homes along the way, she was looking at her map and so, oh yeah, I know those people, from early. So obviously, I'm not suggesting they were intimate friends or anything, but certainly we're part of the same social circles during that Middlebrook winter, and apparently at least well enough that of all those homes, Martha Washington stopped there for breakfast. So yes, although he stays, GW, if you will, is here at the big Wallace House. It's the Old Dutch Parsonage itself that actually has a lot of involvement in the revolutionary politics of the period in New Jersey.
Yeah, some of the heroes, I guess, from that area, which is kind of cool.
Sure, yeah, it makes for an interesting angle, and brings in the whole dimensions of religion and of the colonial colleges and how all that kind of played into at least in New Jersey, the revolutionary.
Yeah, the religious aspect of education in that time period is huge.
Sure. And that's an essential part. And like I say, as William and Mary alumni, William and Mary was a college in a colony with an established church. The Church of England was established there, and so the colony sponsors a college to train ministers of that denomination, and you're done. New Jersey had no established church, and that's what allowed for this kind of, at least among Protestant denominations, this kind of whole variety of dissenting groups. And thus you had this really unusual situation with 2 colonial colleges, 15 miles away from each other, on the verge of Revolutionary War. The College of New Jersey, later Princeton University, and Queens College, of course, later Rutgers, the state university. the Hardenberg kind of fits in that. And both of them will, for the most part, produce students, alumni who are actively involved in the American Revolution.
Yeah, now. All right. So going back to the Wallace House,
Yeah.
most significant or
Okay.
most interesting
These kind of questions.
as far as like,
Yeah.
when you have 1 minute to try and explain to somebody why does the Middlebrook
Oh, sure.
cantonment, why does it matter? How do you get across the importance of this time period Washington's doing?
Yeah, so for the Middlebrook cantonment as a whole, right, what is most significant is it's retrospective, of course. Be careful they don't know at the time how the war is changing, but this is after that big battle of Monmouth, the last major, at least, Washington-led battle in the middle northern colonies and states. The war is now shifting, where Washington will mostly be in this northern theater, sort of commanding the major action from the south, with, of course, his personal presence for that singular Yorktown campaign in 1781. And speaking to that moment, Washington will host here at the Wallace House in May of 1779 diplomats of France and Spain, sort of indicating this world war, that has emerged as the situation changes there. In terms of the historic homes themselves on alone, I just think, again, it's kind of by the coincidence of how they've been collected and preserved, but we get New Jersey. We get this Wallace House, this Scotch merchant from Philadelphia, from that kind of power center. And then we get the Old Dutch Parsonage, this sort of oriented to the old, it's built 1751. New Netherland is 90 years in the past by that time, but this kind of old holdover of New Netherland, the New York, New Jersey region, and those kind of twin poles that, whether or not Benjamin Franklin said it, the barrel tapped at both ends, that was, and in many ways is New Jersey, and sort of this conflict, but also this variety and this creativity and collision that emerges between those two forces. And so together, visiting both the Wallace House and Old Dutch Parsonage as kind of one unit, one really sees this early religious diversity, national diversity, that then leads into in the colonial period, American higher education, but then also in the war, New Jersey's kind of uniquely divided, but also revolutionary ferment in that period. So that's kind of, at least to me, when I think about these two houses, the really neat thing that as historic structures they're able to stay together.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. Now, if somebody wants to come and visit these sites, what are your
sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we do offer, the essential staple is the, historic houses tour. And, we more or less offer those year round. At the moment, the best is, because of the, it's a small operation here, is either to call or check online for special programs or tours. But we can accommodate most kind of special times if necessary. And the best for that would be wallacedutch.eventbrite.com or Facebook at Wallace Dutch for the big tours and programs that you can more or less drop in on. If you'd like to visit another time, though, usually those are Sunday afternoons. If you want to visit another time, Wednesday through Saturday, just to make sure, an email to wallacedutch@dep.nj.gov or a call to 908-725-1015 is the best way to avoid disappointment. Although if you show up and I'm there, I'm happy to show people around, but to make sure you get the really good and thorough experience. And then from there, it's a great opportunity as well to check in with those other organizations, or to even just do on your own kind of a tour of that larger Middlebrook region. And then definitely add it on to those bigger sites in Trenton to the south and Morristown in the north for a pretty neat kind of Revolutionary War corridor here.
Yeah, and if people wanted to read more about it, you mentioned that.
Yes.
What book was that?
Yeah, reading. I thought about that because I know, and right, and yeah, the interesting thing is, of course, it's definitely an underwritten. I don't want to say understudied, because there's definitely a lot of passionate, primarily local historians who have really studied Middlebrook. But the next step, right, translating that into published work and interests. So beyond Carl Prince's work in the 1950s, more recently, there's been a new spate, and I would say Stephen Elliott, I think it's called Surviving the Winters, is his book on the whole of the winter camps of the Revolutionary War, and includes a chapter on Middlebrook, which offers a lot of new insight and also really well-grounded insight. The Heritage Trail Association of New Jersey, headquartered at the Van Horn House, they have in recent years started to sponsor a lot of research on this subject, and have recently published the proceedings of their most recent symposium on the Middlebrook cantonment. And so that is htanj.org, Heritage Trail Association of New Jersey. If you look up their website, you can find out how to order either digital copy or print copy of their proceedings. And I recommend that too as a great published resource. And otherwise, that's kind of the secondary scholarship, what's been written. Otherwise, you can also join us who are interested in this subject area and start diving into those primary sources. So, one of my kind of ongoing projects is, like many Washington headquarters are able to do, we can look at Washington's papers and put our date frames on and see, well, what's he writing about here? And so that's a great starting point for me, at least, as I still try to learn so much more. I'd love to get a source book together where we're working together, like our 5 homes. We all kind of figure out, well, where are the primary sources? Because similar, much as the homes are scattered, so are the documents. There is a lot of good documentation, but it's not just in one shelf somewhere. You got to kind of piece it together across all these different archives. So that's that. But yeah, especially for right now today, if you wanted to read about it, I'd say check out those 2. The published book, but also the proceedings, which kind of give you a sense of, well, what is going on now, among people primarily in the local area, but increasingly, sort of sharing with the larger American Revolution. What are the areas of study and inquiry right now?
Yeah, and you talk about those primary sources. Sometimes you find some really interesting stuff. I know when we were just doing our, of course, we're going to be up in Valley Forge and Monmouth in November.
Nice, yes. Which really is which of course is directly, the lead into this period, yeah.
Correct, yeah. And but when we were at the Potts House, we were the attic of the upper level, and I guess they found a letter from John Lawrence about mentioning how he bumped his head.
Wow.
And so you can stand there, you can see,
that's too cool, yeah. John Lawrence is also on staff at the Wallace House. It'll be in March, though, that he leaves his position as aide-de-camp to Washington. And that's because he takes on a commission from Congress to raise a regiment of Black troops in his home state of South Carolina. And of course, he has the support of Congress for that effort. And he reaches South Carolina, and the legislature there takes a very different approach. But it is, and then one can only imagine. Well, obviously, we know in March he left to take on that post. So what conversations over the dinner table did he have with Washington? What exactly is this idea of yours? And as we trace Washington's own, engagement with both free and enslaved Black forces in the armies of the United States, and also the reality of his own holding of slaves, at Mount Vernon and during the war. It's not just Washington here at headquarters, it's William Lee here as too, as Washington's personal valet, but also his bodyguard, as we kind of are increasingly understanding. Or where did I go with that? Oh, John Lawrence. But yes, but when you mentioned Potts House as well, in terms of sources, again, it's kind of way at the moment, it's not necessarily all in one spot, but another one I really enjoyed was Nancy Lone, I believe is the name, who was an historian out of Valley Forge, who also wrote a book following the camp, following the drum, about the camp followers, with a focus on Valley Forge, but also including reference to other winters of the war as well. And that one gave me a lot of neat insight and introduction to, for example, I know at the Potts House, they're looking into Hannah Till, this a woman who was a cook. She was enslaved at the beginning of the war and attained emancipation from slavery during the course of the war. And she had a child. There are records of her giving birth at the Potts House. And then leaves me then as the interpreter of the Wallace House to figure out, well, where is this child a year later, and think about the reality of a woman in slavery and in freedom, eventually working as a cook in Washington's headquarters and having children, and what is that kind of whole, what presence is there of a toddler? What is this child going through? From that perspective. So so I do mention that, just as an aside to reflect on how, at the moment at least, we'll get there with the nice big book, but at the moment at least, how there are all these other insights to kind of glean from this larger landscape, and then it helps me then in turn bring that from the Middlebrook perspective to our visitors and guests here.
Yeah, no, you have that's a fan. You have got plenty of time that they're there. Like you said, you can go into their letters and diaries during that time period and try and glean some of that information.
And if I'll make more, I guess, of a quip than anything, but as we think about these big anniversary years, as I like to say, by all means, I'm hoping, we're looking forward to partnering, especially part of the New Jersey effort through Revolution NJ with our Historical Commission and our Crossroads of the American Revolution National Heritage Area, looking at 2026, of course. But as I like to say, well, whatever we don't get done by then, we still get 2 more years until Washington arrives. So we can, by all means, we'll try our best. And then we got some breathing room. But I mean that not to be cynical at all, to be the most exciting way to think. All right, here's kind of this really interesting moment in time to interpret these homes, and what is it that we can do with the interpretation. Of course, the big challenge is also historic preservation. And although we do belong to the state of New Jersey, the 2 homes, much like state resources and federal and private resources throughout the country, there are massive challenges too, and how to build those together into that is a major. But I think one can only complement the other. Increasing our understanding can only increase, the interest and in the preservation. My little hang up, if you see in your picture there, is those stucco chimneys, which I wanted to get the stucco off just for aesthetic reasons, because we should have beautiful red brick. But now I'm learning that it's also really a preservation issue, that the brick is crumbling underneath and could be a threat. So it's fascinating though. I mean, how, I'm as anyone who kind of works or volunteers in or around these places, you start to learn and encounter so many other fields of study or interest as a result of trying to figure out what goes on or what could go on.
Yeah. I'm hoping 2026 will give you'll be
sure.
the
well, as I say, we've got the
and as a Virginian, where it doesn't focus heavily, obviously our people focus heavily in the early part, but 1781 is really where the war comes to Virginia.
Sure, it's a similar situation, but no, where truly it is, we have a full 8 years of Revolutionary War experienced in New Jersey, and it's a massive component.
All right, well, we did get a question about whether the Sullivan Clinton expedition
sure, and
at the Wallace House, and whether they met with Washington there before that. Do you know?
Yes, no, I do believe that was a major, and I'm still in that process of trying to go through a lot of the primary sources to get some more references to support a lot of this information. But yes, that's a major part of the deliberations that would take place at the Wallace House, is the planning of that expedition. The Sullivan campaign would be I guess roughly summer of 1779, really brutal campaign against at least the 5 of the 6 nations, as they be understood at that time, of the Iroquois. From Washington's perspective, of course, this is these American Indian nations who had allied with the British were a threat to what you'd call the United States or American settlement along upstate New York. In retaliation to that threat, however, Washington would launch and order a really brutal campaign that affected not only the military of these nations, but also the civilians, including villages, including women and children, and there's another huge part, an element of that of the conflict, right? That's so essential to this moment of Revolutionary War. Related to the Sullivan campaign, Washington also receives a visit from again, in that period called the Delaware nation, or a representative Delaware chiefs. And they would visit the Wallace House en route eventually to Philadelphia for further deliberations with Congress. And I'm nowhere near expert on this period or area either, but my understanding at the moment, at least, is basically this was sort of Congress's attempt to as the United States is increasingly targeting American Indian nations that had allied with the British, to then sort of shore up, if you will, support among those who were either supporting the American cause or at least had not, taken a firm side. And it is definitely known in May of 1779 that those chiefs, the Delaware chiefs, visit the Wallace House as part of a ceremonial visit to Middlebrook before then traveling on to Philadelphia.
Oh,
So
wow.
right there, we have these essential, war and peace, those perhaps promises and realities and all that combined in that effort too.
I can't help but think about all the cultural different,
Yeah.
think about all these different people visiting, and
another one that definitely warrants further research to get some good understanding to this period and moment.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Folks, make sure you go and check him out at the Wallace House. But if you can't make it there,
Of course.
he's coming on the tour this year, aren't you? I believe.
Yes. Yeah. I've been really interested to since my discovery along the King's Highway in Maidenhead. It's I really enjoy getting to see all the different work that your group is doing, and it's exciting to see, even though I'm relatively local to that region, to see, to really get to know those places with kind of some new perspectives and new understandings. Is always awesome. And of course, Monmouth Battlefield State Park is another great part of our network of state parks, forests, and historic sites in New Jersey.
So folks, if you haven't bought your tickets yet, you can go to emergingrevolutionarywar.org. We only have a few left, I think. But you can join us as we tour. Yeah, we'll be touring. Yeah, the more famous Valley Forge. And
you say more famous, but and there's, everything is local. Isn't it crazy how that affects? I remember the first time I went to even before I studied at William and Mary, I did the pre-college program that the NIAD, the Institute of American History and Democracy, offers for high school students. And I was like, really? You didn't grow up learning that, Washington crossed the Delaware, and in that single moment, the dark ages were transferred into the modern free world, so, but yes, I perhaps beyond me, Valley Forge is more famous, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating, isn't it? How that, how those networks work together.
Just Valley Forge and
it's awesome for me, reading a work like yours, which I will admit I've not finished, but I'm in progress, and it's really cool to see. But places like you say, Birmingham, that little village, and I know that's a crossroads with a gas station near the airport, but I think that's in its own way a really cool and interesting way to explore the landscape. So.
I think that's, and on our tour, we're going to be going by on our way out to between Monmouth and Valley Forge, which are,
nice,
obviously interpreted. We're going to be hitting up some lesser known sites.
Nice. Yes. And of course, there's a lot of that. That whole campaign is a really interesting and thankfully a well-documented one too. So which makes it easier for us as historians. James McHenry, before he had a fort, he kept a great journal during that campaign. I think he's a big source for what Washington was up to then.
So we'll be up there, and like I said, Paul will be joining us with his fantastic, and anybody who's interested in learning more about the, we talked about during Middlebrook, the kind of, it's becoming a world war at that point. We got a symposium we're holding in Old Town Alexandria in end of September. We're going to be digging into all the international aspects of the American Revolution and the impacts and everything else like that internationally. So if you want to check out more about that, you can hit up our website as well. And hopefully we'll get Paul to write some blog posts for us.
Cool. Yes. Well, that's the trick, right? Yeah, we got to get the stuff written down, right? But yes. No, but it's really great to see and read all the work going on.
Yeah, we already got a question. Somebody wants to know when your book's coming.
Oh, can I tell you, this is the most foolish thing to say, but I will confide. I've got my title for the George Washington, New Jersey book. I have no research or evidence, but hear it out. Washington, Cincinnatus, right? New Jersey, Nova Caesarea, Nova Caesar, Nova, New Jersey in Latin. And when they founded it, they used that name, Nova Caesarea, because the Isle of Jersey and the Channel is really a corruption of Caesar. Cincinnatus in Caesarea, Washington, New Jersey. That's as far as I've gotten with the book, so we'll see. As you can tell, I started the wrong way, but it occurred to me on one of those walks through this beautiful, New Jersey landscape. Cincinnati. So said it now, no one can take it, but yes, but thanks very much. But in a more serious way, yeah, but definitely follow on Facebook at Wallace Dutch, or our state park services at nj.gov/DEP/parks and forests, and our nonprofit Friends Association, who really carry out a lot of the advocacy work and fundraising to make a lot of the great stuff at the historic sites happen, is Wallace House Association.org, and that's the Wallace House and Old Dutch Parsonage Association. So definitely in the shorter term, that's where you'll find much more useful information in terms of learning more.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. 2 weeks from now, we'll be live with Mark Lender, who's going to be talking about the Conway Cabal. Help lead us up to our tour this November. But
nice.
Thank you, Paul, and hope you join us again. And everybody, go check out Wallace House while you can.
Thank you, and thank you, Mark, and all for joining.